Hello class, this lecture is on compare and contrast. So let's talk a little bit about that. Comparing is telling how something is similar, contrasting is telling how something is different, and in this slide it talks about apples and oranges. So apples and oranges are obviously both fruit, and there are some other things about them that are similar and different. We use compare and contrast analysis at times in our everyday lives. If you think about it, you go out to buy something at a store and you compare TV prices, quality, brands, types of telephones, even hairstylists is listed here. So there are a lot of different ways that we do that in our everyday lives. If you look at this talks about basically how you're going to choose a topic and settle down on it. The problem with comparing and contrasting is that if you pick things that are too different or too alike, depending on how you're going to handle it, it just doesn't work very well. So here you see an ant and a man, and there's so many differences that if you're going to contrast them, it just doesn't make sense to do that. They need to be a little bit closer in likeness to do that. A good comparison should lead you beyond the obvious. So, for example, contrast between humans and ants, like I just talked about. But on further analysis, if you find that humans and ants do have some meaningful, unexpected similarities, for example, and I'm going to read this, both are social creatures and live in a complex society, and both have tasks and specific jobs to perform and roles to fulfill in their respective societies. So you could actually write about that topic, and it might even be interesting rather than talking about how different they are. So that would be a pretty cool paper to write. When two subjects are similar, it may be the differences that are worth writing about, and that's kind of the point of the ant and the man. And of course, when two subjects are different, it may be better to write about the similarities. So depending on what you have decided to work on, or what you're considering at this point, because this is just a time for brainstorming and consideration, try to look carefully at both of those. So developing points of discussion can be done in a couple ways. And here you see two different types of cars that could easily be compared or contrasted. So you get the idea of something that's similar enough that you can work with either side of those. So on the next slide, this talks about this actually gives you an example, and this is developing points of discussion. So when you're working on your actual essay and how you're going to discuss the two subjects, you make sure that each subject, so if you're covering different types of cars, then you're going to make sure that each point that you pick to discuss covers the same items. So for example, if you look at novel A here that I have listed in novel B, in novel A, if you were discussing major characters and minor characters of novel A, then you also should do that in novel B, and that's kind of why that's hanging to the left to show you that those are identical. And then so you're discussing book A, and you're talking about the themes in the book, and so you would also talk about the themes in the other book, or symbols that represent ideas in both books. You address both, whether or not you're comparing or you're contrasting. So it doesn't matter which way you go with this, you still cover the same exact points in it. Okay, so we're on thesis statements, and believe it or not, thesis statements and compare and contrast essays are actually easier than in some other essays. And if you look here, it talks about identifying the two subjects you're going to discuss and each point in the order that you see them. So if we go back to the novel A, novel B slide, you would talk about the names of the novels that you're going to discuss, and maybe even the genre or the type. Like a mystery or fantasy or whatever the type is that you're getting ready to discuss, and each point that you're going to make. So you're going to discuss major characters, minor characters, themes, and symbolism. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how to create that. I'm actually going to be posting a little bit of a review for you, but I'm going to post a thesis development video uh, during this unit so that that can kind of help you. Listing your points in the order that they're addressed in the essay is called forecasting, and that just basically means that you're giving the reader an idea of what's to come. So if you have a look at the next slide, most, if not all, compare and contrast essays are organized in this way. One is point by point, and one is subject by subject, and we're going to look at both of those in just a minute. So in a subject by subject organizational pattern in this essay, you're writing a separate essay basically on each subject, but you also still discuss the same points for both subjects. And by separate essay, I don't mean it's separate papers. It's just that's the type of writing that it appears to be. They're two separate entities within the paper. So here, for example, if you look at this, in a subject by subject organizational pattern, the essay flows like this. So you're talking about living with your parents in one complete section. So if you look at A, living with parents, you talk about the expenses that are involved with that, or lack of expenses, responsibilities that are involved with that, or lack of responsibility, or freedom, or not freedom, however you're going to attack it. And then after that, you talk about the living in an apartment, expenses, responsibilities, and freedom. So it flows that way. You cover one entire subject and then the next. And some people work that better. That's fine. They work that way better, and that's fine. The next one is a little bit different. In a point-by-point organizational pattern, you make the point about one subject and then follow it with a comparable point about the other. So, for instance, you're talking about the living expenses. You're going to talk about what that's like at home with parents and living out on your own. And then responsibilities, the same thing. You go back and forth, so you can see that there's a difference in the patterns there. And that just tells you the same thing that I just told you. Transitions for the essay are critical in helping your reader follow which point you are making. Here are a few things that a few words, just suggestions to help a reader know that you are comparing something. And these are just a few words, just as, so, like, likewise, in comparison, similarly, much in the same way. So there are a few that might help you out if you're planning on comparing two items. Transitions used for contrasts. So you're telling how something is different are these, and these are logical, but there's a few extra ones so you don't have to reuse the same one over and over and over and it becomes repetitive. So there's although, but, conversely, despite, even though, however, in contrast, instead, yet, still, nonetheless, nevertheless, on the contrary, on the other hand, unlike, and whereas. So that gives you quite a few to kind of play around with that might help with this. So, for example, two members of my family, my brother and sister have different attitudes toward exercise. My parents are alike in that they are both easygoing. Two friends or coworkers. You as a child or you as an adult. Two vacations you've taken. These are some examples of topics that you can contrast and compare. So, the checklist for drafting a compare and contrast essay, you narrow the topic in light of your audience and purpose, and in this case it's going to be me and perhaps some of your classmates, so please keep that in mind. Compose the thesis statement. Make sure again that you talk about the two items in that thesis statement and each point that you're going to cover about those. Free write or brainstorm. Remember when we were in class and we did the diagram where I drew circles on the board and talked about a birthday party? That's one method of free writing. You can also just write sentence after sentence to decide how you're going to handle the points of contrast until you are able to narrow it down, and eventually choose the points you'll use and use them for each item. Make the planner outline denoting subject by subject or point by point. So your essay should be organized one way or the other. So if you need help, look back at this video, have a look at those and see which way that you think you might prefer to do that. number all points of comparison in the correct order. And that doesn't mean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That just means that they are in the correct order. So when you start your thesis statement, all of your points go in that same direction. Provide appropriate transitions and various sentence structures. I don't believe that any of you all have that issue, so I don't think it's a problem, but it basically means, sentences should be different lengths. Nobody wants to read short, choppy sentences or very long, elaborate sentences. You need to change it up so the brain can kind of absorb that as it's being read. So thank you for listening to this. I'm going to post one more, just kind of alerting you to a couple of words to look for and a couple of extra tips. One document maybe in writing rather than in video form. So thanks again, and I hope this is helpful.